The Generations Duocons are a pair of figures that have interested me for a long time, and now that I've finally managed to get the both of them, I could not resist talking about them. Because I kind of hold these two responsible for my switch in how I collect. When I got back into collecting and started reviewing a couple of years later, I was still in that stage where I was only buying figures for the characters. But just before that, when Siege rolled around, I kept seeing this thing that looked really interesting to me. I had no idea who the character was, but the toy looked like fun and it had a really interesting gimmick. Then when I did start collecting a little bit later on in Kingdom, I found out about Battletrap as well, and that they were a pair. Because look, I was barely aware that Power of the Primes even existed. I only ever saw Jazz and Swoop on shelves. But yeah, I said to myself, look, I don't know who these guys are, but if they're ever both in front of me, I'll pick them up. And yeah, this year at TF Nation, I saw them both, so figured why not. And now that I do have them, how do they fare? Well, let's take a look at him and find out. And I think first up, we'll take a look at Siege Skytread, because he's got a lot less going on, but not necessarily in a bad way. The sculpted detail and proportions on this figure are quite a lot of fun. This is one of those Siege toys that I think doesn't go too nuts on the sculpting. You know, I'm not a huge fan of the overgreebled aesthetic, but this thing nails it. All the panel lines and ridges seem particularly structured, and there's plenty of flat spaces to let it breathe. But there are of course a couple of spots that go a little bit ham, and they're really appreciated. That chest plate and the feet, oh, love it. And also I kind of appreciate the shaping of the shoulders. They're just kind of interesting, you know? And the detail aside, the figure's also pretty clean. There's not a whole lot of kibble. There is that butt flap on the back, but I don't know, that kind of unbroken jet silhouette kind of works as a feature. Helps that you can angle the wings however you want, although I do wish the tail fins could have folded in just for the sake of the posing. But the overall aesthetic of the sculpt here really carries a vibe. You know, it's not exactly a unique body type, but the placement of some of the kibble, the sizing of it, it feels very distinct. Which is kind of funny with how generic his head is, although, come on, you can't tell me that that thing isn't well sculpted. This feels just very default bad guy, but with upgrades. And I love it. Although, can't quite say I'm mad about the colours. All the painting's really good. All bronze highlights here and there, that beautiful blue cockpit, and that really well-painted face. That red visor really pops. But the plastic colours do feel a little bit overly drab. You know, I get this is what he's supposed to be, these are pretty much exactly the colours that he had on the G1 toy, but I wouldn't have minded maybe the orange and pinkier shades of the Titan's Return one. But I cannot bring myself to complain about the look any further than that. He's just such a kind of cute figure. This is the third most friend-shaped Decepticon I've ever seen, and I love it. Now, accessory-wise, it's kind of a simple affair. Well, for Siege. He comes with this long blaster, which is very obviously a tank turret. I really like the aesthetic of it, whether you use it as just a handheld weapon, or my personal preference of a fusion cannon. Although I do quite like using it as a back turret just to break up the silhouette a little bit. He also comes with this much smaller pistol. I do like that little bit of painted detail on it. You can plug it in his hand as is and it looks pretty nice, or you can combine it with the tank turret to use it as this big long sniper rifle looking thing. You know, these accessories ain't half bad, although I do wish there was a little bit less waffling on them, but I can't really say that Siege ever missed when it came to arming the characters. And nor did it with the posing, because it's pretty good here. The head is on a ball joint with a decent amount of wiggle room, although it is mounted in the torso, which I'm not a huge fan of. I know why it was done for transformation clearance, but I don't love it. The shoulders move out pretty far and can go all the way around. There's bicep swivels, pretty deep elbows, nothing at the wrist. There's a waist swivel. The hips can move out pretty far and forward and back pretty decently if you move them around the tail fins. There's thigh swivels, decent knees, the feet can move up a little bit and down pretty far, and there's decent ankle pivots. The posing here is nothing amazing, there isn't a single joint that's gonna blow your mind, but it is all pretty good. I appreciate how little what kibble there is gets in the way. He's got a nice stable base with those enormous feet and all the joints in them, and all round he is very solid. And it just makes for a very simple but fun and satisfying robot mode. And I'm very pleased that the waist is quite as solid as it is, because of course, for transformation, this guy does split in half. So let's get into that. Getting the legs into the tank mode is a pretty simple affair, but it is a little bit overly squishy. And I don't think the turret panels are ever gonna tab in properly on my copy. But it is still pretty fun. But the jet mode is kind of a delight. There's so many different clicky points and satisfying panels to get tabbed in. I just love the way that the torso kind of explodes out and sucks the arms in. And you are left with these two alt modes, which are absolutely adorable. Man, I love the Duocon gimmick. It's so charming. These two chibified vehicles just sing to me. The tank mode is very much a space tank mode. It reminds me a lot of Impactor, but not in a bad way. You know, it's very long, it's very square, and you probably couldn't tell what it was supposed to be if the turret wasn't on there. Speaking of, I do wish that turret peg was a little bit longer because it doesn't stay on perfectly. It's got some wheels on the underside, so it rolls alright. You don't see that anymore. And despite its simplicity, it is just fun. But the jet has just an amazing vibe, at least from the top. You know, there is a little bit of underside arm kibble, but that's pretty ignorable to me just because of the dark color. And it lets me really appreciate the top side for all of its amazing mechanical detail. I mean, the gentle slope of the center section into the cockpit, or the lining detail along the wings. I just love the look of this thing, and the fact that you can stick him on a stand and get him in the air is just a bonus. And once again, you don't see that shit anymore. Whenever I pick up a new Siege toy, I always really appreciate how great this line was. It brought in so many simple but great features. The standardized posing, the combining weapons, the weapon ports absolutely everywhere, the level of accuracy, it was just... I love it. But as much as I enjoy this figure, it is kinda safe and simple. Power of the Prime's Battletrap, on the other hand, is batshit insane, and I f***ing love it. The sculpted details on this figure are pretty good, they're not far behind Skytread. Some of the details are a little bit softer and there's more flat surfaces, and the aesthetic is decidedly different, a lot more roundy, which contrasts really nicely with whatever sharp details there are, like the cockpit on the chest or some of the angles around the feet. Makes them stand out really well, but the proportions are f***ing nuts. The feet and shins are these huge armored sections that ground the figure really well, and then they just go up into these really thin thighs and hips, and that waist tapers out into some really broad shoulders. It's insane. What is this? I genuinely cannot think of another Transformers figure I own with these kind of proportions, but you know what? It kinda works. The way that it tapers in and out might be a little bit jarring, but it does feel decidedly organic. Although there are a couple of points where the sculpt isn't quite flawless. I think the head is a little bit too small. Sure, it works with the aesthetic, but it's just a little overly beady, which is a shame because it's sculpted really well. I do find the legs go a little bit overly deep, but from the way this figure functions, you can't really avoid that. But those two are minor nitpicks. The only thing that I really have a problem with is the backpack. There's a couple of ways you can orient this, and I don't think any of them look all that good. There is this one with the rotor in the right place, but it sits kind of far off the back, and I'm not a huge fan of that. I tend to keep it in this flatter configuration where nothing moves around. I do wish maybe the backpack transformed slightly differently so it could keep the rotor in the right place and be closer to the back, but I'm not going to split any hairs over it. You know, I'm not 100% sure what the overall opinion on this figure is in the community, but I think the sculpt is going to be pretty subjective as to whether you like it or not. I do, but it ain't going to be for everyone. But what I do think this thing does objectively well and much better than Skytread is the deco. That off-white and the tealy blue are a really good combo, and they're broken up really nicely by the black joints. It stands out on a shelf way more than his mate does. But the other area where I think this thing really has a point in its favor is the painting, because there's so much more on this guy. There's all these extra accenting colors around the feet and the shins and the chest. I particularly love those pinkish windscreens on the ankles. All those little pops of color just catch the eye really nicely, and they help take away from the weirdness of the proportions a little bit. I just really appreciate the aesthetic that this guy brings to the table. It's very different to Skytread, but I do really appreciate it, and they still look fantastic together. I'm never gonna go out of my way to tell you that this thing looks perfect, but I appreciate it. But more than the aesthetic, I do appreciate the play value of this thing, because while it might not have any accessories, he does pose very well, especially for a pre-siege figure. The head is on a mushroom peg, so it can only swivel, although you can make it look down with a panel that it's on, although that doesn't look brilliant. The shoulders and elbows are on ball joints with a decent amount of range, so you can get whatever poses you need out of them. Nothing at the wrists. There's an ab crunch thanks to one of the transformation joints. There's a waist swivel. The hips are on fairly unrestricted ball joints. There's thigh swivels, kind of restricted knees because of how much kibble moves around them, and there's ball joints at the ankles, which give you everything you really need. Now, usually I'm not a fan of ball joints being used on this kind of figure, although I do understand it here, both from the way this guy was sold and also the era that it was in. And I actually think a lot of the ball joints on this guy work really well for what they are, except for the knees, but that's just because of the general assembly around them. Makes them a little bit hard to use. But generally speaking, this is a fairly solid and pretty dynamic figure. Although I will say that the waist connection isn't quite as solid as Skytread, and that's because that isn't a flat peg this time round. That's a head. Yeah, instead of releasing this guy as a deluxe with 2 alt modes like they did Skytread as a bog standard Duocon, they instead gave this guy 2 other robot modes and released him as 2 Legends figures, which is a really interesting approach to it. So, say hello to Power of the Prime's Battle Slash and Road Trap. And these two were, more than a little bit janky. I'd say Road Trap is definitely the more successful of the two, mostly because he has to do a lot less. He carries a lot of my favorite features from the Combiner, the big boxy car feet, and that really cool design on the chest which came from the shins. He's not exactly the tidiest from the back, it is quite hollow back there, but that's kind of acceptable with the gimmick. His main issues mostly come in the form of posing. The head is the waist swivel, so that's just a mushroom peg again. The arms are really restricted, they can't move back at all, and they're just a couple of ball joints, which it works fine, but it's not great. And then the the legs are actually pretty good. Once again, they're just ball joints, but they have pretty good range. This is a really fun, tubby little guy. He's not perfect, but he gets the job done. There's obviously problems, but I can excuse them. Battle Slash, on the other hand, I'm not 100% sure if I can excuse. Road Trap was a little bit compromised. This guy's just kind of fucking strange. He's 70% hip, and while he does have some cool details on his chest, a lot of it doesn't really work for me, especially how small his head is. And the posing is exactly the same as Road Trap, just worse. The hips would much rather split apart than move. He doesn't have that big stable base, so he falls over a lot. And this rotor, while a cool kind of accessory weapon piece, does get in the way, considering it's taller than he is. But if you take a step back from looking at the individual figures and how compromised they are, and you take a look at just how good that combine mode was, I don't mind. These are just a bonus. Although I will say the alt modes are more reflective of the individual robot modes than the combiner. Transforming Road Trap into the car mode is kind of fun and simple. There is a little bit of clashiness with the feet getting into place, but things like moving the wheels down so they can fit into the hands on those struts is really clever. Battle Slash, on the other hand, I find kind of a clashy mess. There's a lot of parts of this guy, particularly with the arms, where you're moving them around on these struts that just don't feel like they have quite as much clearance as you need, and it does make it more of a pain than it should be to get this guy into the helicopter mode, which is not the best thing I've ever seen in the world. Look, neither of these alt modes are quite as good as the ones from Skytread, but at the very least, Road Trap has some charm to him. That big gap in the back and the fact that he can't roll brilliantly are the only real problems he has. Yes, the roof is very clearly a robot chest, but I think it kind of works with the look, and it is just a very satisfying, fun-looking little car. And once again, the pink windows fuck. But Battle Slash, I just don't know if there's any saving this thing. The look is just off. It's way too bulky. The bottom 2/3 of the front half are barely a helicopter. The tail is so thick and stumpy because of how it has to transform, and the top half, I'm not convinced. The rotor barely even spins, for God's sake. There's so many issues with this helicopter mode, even that big hole in the front. I get that this is a Legends release, but this just doesn't work well. But all in all, generally speaking, I don't mind the two of them together. Look, would I be interested in a new version of Battletrap made in the same manner as Skytread? Yeah, probably, but I'm more than happy with this one, and I'm so happy that they did something interesting with it. Overall, if you want a safer bet, then Skytread is probably a better release, but if you want something fun and interesting, get yourself a Battletrap. Or hell, do what I did, get both. They're really good companion pieces for one another. I'm not 100% sure about the aftermarket because I've never looked for these things on there, but at toy fairs and conventions, I've seen these two individually quite a lot. And yeah, whether it's individually or together, I definitely recommend them. But that's just me. Why not let me know what you think down in the comments? Which of these guys is better? If you enjoyed the video, then please leave a like. And be sure to subscribe for the next one. Look, I can't guarantee that it's going to be here on time for me to start making the video on it, but 86 Megatron is due for next week, so that's what I'm hoping to get out. And if all goes well and I can get it out on time, you can also expect to see the early access on my Patreon, along with photo galleries, getting your name in the credits of the video, the whole works. It's always an option for you. And yeah, right now though, I'm gonna go get a cold drink, because for some reason the UK's decided to be hot again, and I'm dying. Anyway, ciao.